Hey, AP GovWorld, guess what? We made it to the last video for Unit 4. This is so exciting. Today we're going to cover the concepts in 4.9 and 4.10. So I have to say, this video also has a return of your buddy Madison. I heard there was some sadness that the dude wasn't in the last video, so here's the return. So let's start with 4.9, Ideology in Economic Policy. And we're going to talk about fiscal policy, monetary policy, and the Federal Reserve. So when we start with fiscal policy, that is about government's ability to tax and spend. So to get money and to put it back out. And here's a cool little image from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. All right, so fiscal policy, like I said, is about the ability to tax and spend. And the ability to tax comes right from the Constitution. And we know taxing is done by Congress, and we know that they're under Article 1. So taxing comes from Article 1, Section 8. And also the 16th Amendment, which created the federal income tax in 1913. And also Congress created the IRS, which basically is what the group that collects the taxes and figures out how much to get and all that stuff. Now, they also have the ability to spend. And that comes from Article 1, Section 7 and Article 1, Section 9. And that's what gives Congress what is known as the power of the purse. So Madison is rocking a Michael Kors right now, learning how to tax and spend. Now, where does all this money, like how much to tax and what are they spending it on? What is the budget? POTUS, right? The president is the one who initiates the budget, and they do that with their OMB. And that's like the president's accountants. But then Congress is the one that passes the budget, and that's the CBO, which is Congress's accountants, basically. So just earlier this week, or about a week ago, we have a new head of the OMB, Ms. Shalonda Young, and she's the first Black woman to lead this office. And they haven't had a permanent leader for about a year since he took over, but she's now finally been confirmed. And all this year, especially more so in the fall, we saw lots of news articles and news stories about the budget and getting it passed. All this falls under that situation. Now, remember, a lot of this is partisan. We saw it being partisan, right? Because Congress is the one that passes it. They may not all agree to how the budget is spent and what it's being spent on. And with the very split Congress right now, you'll see why that was such a hot debate and so critically divided. Right now, when they tax, they have different types of taxes. We have the progressive tax and we have the flat tax. Progressive tax is where there's two direct arrows going up. As you make more money, your tax rate goes up, right? You see a little political cartoon on that here. That poor turkey is going to be somebody's dinner. Then we have a flat tax. The flat tax is the rate's the same. Maybe everyone pays 10% of what they make for taxes, whether if they make $30,000 a year, $50,000 a year, $100,000, $10 million, $1 billion, right? That would be a flat tax. The flat tax is more supported by conservatives and vice versa. There's also different incentives, different tax breaks. Maybe like companies get a tax break if they learn how to be more eco-friendly, for example. Now, let's talk about monetary policy. A monetary policy is how the government manages the supply and demand of money and what the value of the dollar is. And it's an issue because if you can't just, like, people say, like, why doesn't the government just print out more money? Because that means the value of the dollar is not the same. The value of the dollar decreases the more money that's in circulation. And that causes inflation. And even though inflation naturally happens to some degree, that creates it too rapidly. So to give you an example, back when I was in high school, if I wanted to buy Dunkin' Donuts, which would be disgusting because they're bad for you, $1.
Listen to her.
No.
Dunkin' Donuts is amazing.
No, they're not.
Yes, they are.
$1 could get me 2 disgusting sprinkled donuts.
No, they're not disgusting. They're delicious.
Today,
she doesn't know what she's talking about.
$1 could only get Madison 1 disgusting donut. So maybe there's some advantages to inflation. You can't buy as much junk food.
She doesn't know what she's talking about. Don't listen to her. Dunkin' is delicious. She has no idea what she's saying.
Now, let's talk about the Federal Reserve System. This was created in 1913. It's not a coincidence that we learned that's when the income tax came about, right? The progressives are going on. We talked about that in an early video. Now, the Federal Reserve is a board, and it has 12 members. That's often referred to as the Fed, right? There's 7 governors on that board, and what they do is they set monetary policy. It's how the government manages all of these things. Now, the president approves the members, and then they're approved by the Senate. It's often more partisan because they don't want to be influenced by politics. So you'll often see a federal, a Fed Reserve director serve under multiple presidents under various parties. It's not someone that's just switched because a new president comes in. Not often, anyways. So what are the roles of the Fed? They buy and sell stocks and bonds. They regulate money reserves required at commercial banks. They set the interest rates that you see there. That's from earlier this week. They're supposed to be increasing the interest rates several times in the upcoming year. They also set the discount rate. So what the discount rate is, it's the rate at which eligible banks can borrow. So it puts it's a rate on loans for banks, not so much like that we would be paying. They also regulate the reserve requirement. So what that is, it is the reserves against their liabilities. So, for example, right now, 10% of all that a bank gets in checking deposits and must have on hand at any one time. So I'll tell you what, if you're like, oh my gosh, this hurts my brain, there's not going to be an AP Gov exam on which is not a role of the Fed or explain a discount rate. That's not going to be there. But if you want to learn more about it, that's just some details to look into.
This hurts my brain. So don't worry if it hurts your brain.
Yes. All right. So now let's move on to something that will hurt their brain less. And that is ideology and social policy. So how we learned about social policies. So how are they influenced? All right. So we're going to talk about a couple things here. We're going to start off talking about entitlements. All right. You hear this word a lot. It's a big word in politics.
No, I don't.
Entitlements are government services that Congress promised by law to citizens. So it's basically a law. So it's something that someone thinks they're going to receive or get. Congress passed a law that said they would. And if they don't get it, they can actually sue because it was by law. I was supposed to get this, right? But in order to get certain entitlements, citizens must meet eligibility requirements. It could be that you're a certain age, that you only make a certain amount of money, that you have a certain disability, all sorts of things. So spending on these entitlements is mandatory in the federal budget. So if there was a law that was passed for these entitlements, the next budget can't eliminate them, right? When it's like, oh, where can we cut things from the budget? They can't just eliminate things that were already mandated by law, right? So here's an example. This is a little bit old. This is from 2010, but these are example of some entitlements. There's 2 main types of entitlements. We have social insurance programs and public assistance programs. So here Madison is wearing that fedora because Madison's elderly and wants to collect Social Security, maybe even some Medicare, right? Those would both be examples of social insurance programs. So would unemployment insurance, which a lot of people have collected from under COVID. Then you have public assistance programs. These would be things like food stamps, rent vouchers, Medicaid. You see some examples of other things here. So with social insurance programs, people paid into it with the understanding that they could get that money out later for certain things. With public assistance programs, people don't pay into that specifically, but taxpayers as a whole, all of them pay into it to get it. Both parties mostly accept these in general. You'll see that conservatives are more weary of public assistance programs. They may call them handouts more often, is sort of a condemnation of them. But in order to get public assistance programs, there's also certain requirements. Usually, it's being that you have to fall below the poverty line. Um, both parties are pretty equally supportive of social insurance programs because you're only getting what you already paid into. I just learned a cute little way to remember the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. It was Medicare is to care for the elderly, Medicaid is to aid the poor. Something to keep in mind. All right, now let's talk about how we look at these things based on ideology, liberal or conservative. Where does Madison decide where he falls? Now, liberals are more supportive of these programs. They believe that government support should be available. They believe that such programs help solve inequality. So think of that equality of opportunity that we talked about. They believe that it is the government's job to protect the general welfare. So therefore, this is actually under a basic role of government. Conservatives, on the other hand, are a little bit more wishy-washy about increased government spending. They're not apt to go on board anything that's going to increase government spending. They believe more of equality of opportunity, that it exists. You don't need the government to help you obtain that. You just need to take advantages of opportunity, and they would rather you do it and have the government be more limited, because conservatives believe in small and limited government. And remember, those things are also sort of on the same page as libertarian views: small government, less government intervention. And I just wanted to point out, protect the general welfare. That may sound familiar to you. That does come from the Constitution. That's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, right? What are the powers of Congress? To lay and collect taxes, that's the power of the purse. Duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts, provide for the common defense, and general welfare. So many people interpret that's what general welfare means. All right. So earlier in this unit, the very beginning, Madison had to decide which table to sit at. Where was he going to take his spoon and his fork? And the liberal table on the left had certain ideologies and policies that match them. And then you have the conservative table on the right. So now, what table pertaining to just what we learned about here today? Now, when it comes to things like ideology and its different influences on policy, what about privacy? Right? Liberals are more prone to support individual rights and to really uphold those as valuable. For example, remember Roe v. Wade was determined on the right to privacy, right? So it is also more supported by liberals than conservatives, right? Conservatives think that privacy should be upheld more by state laws than federal laws. Remember, devolution: pass as much power down to the states and not as much from the federal government. So a little bit of issue with federalism still at play here. All right. Then we have government surveillance. Liberals are more in favor of stricter limits on government surveillance, and conservatives are more supportive of government surveillance. We'll talk about this again in a second. Both parties, both ideologies, however, are worried about data breaches. They've been happening a lot more lately. What are we just hearing about this week? What about the cyber attacks from Russia, right? And they are also worried about government access to personal information. So no matter where Madison sits, that's going to be a concern. Liberals are more supportive of free public education for all. Everyone should be going to public schools unless you're paying for private schools on your own. Whereas conservative believes more that there should be more alternatives, school choice, and vouchers, and things like that. Now we have here, something just happened. Just some stories of what's been going on and how they relate to it. So the story that we've heard and we've read about, the SCOTUS will be seeing soon, is the coaches reading the school prayer. Did I miss the? Oh, you didn't see the one on religion. All right, I covered the one on religion, so that's my bad. When it comes to religion, liberals are more supportive of more restrictions on religion activity, um, especially if other rights are violated. So not that people can't practice their religion, but if practicing their religion infringes others' rights. Whereas conservatives are more opposed to government interference in the practice of religion. So the example with this school prayer, if this actually was brought up for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's nomination hearings today. They were trying to question what would she feel about this, but as she said, she's not going to talk about one that's before the court now. So liberals would be more against an example like this, where conservatives would be more against the government interfering with something like this. When it comes to things like education and school vouchers, this is from this week as well. The Georgia Senate rejected a private school voucher, so that would probably anger more conservatives and probably please more liberals. The On the bottom left, how California is building the nation's first privacy police. We know California to be more of a liberal state, so therefore they're taking steps to try to combat what they see as privacy breaches. I did want to tell you, I learned about a case, Kylo versus the United States, about a week ago, where it was ruled that the police could not use like thermo imaging cameras to look into people's homes. It was trying to detect where marijuana was being grown because that was seen as search and seizure without a proper warrant. And in that case, that ruling was, the majority was actually by conservatives. So they it wasn't that the liberals thought it was more of an issue with privacy. We can talk more about that case. And then this other case from the FBI, this just came out earlier this week, I believe March 4th. This is 2022, if you're watching this years later, about the Supreme Court siding with FBI in the case on spying on Muslims. It was a conservative majority in this case as well. And it had a little bit more to do, though, than just with privacy and surveillance. We can read the opinion and you can see some of the other factors that were involved here. All right. Lastly, just keep in mind when Madison's figuring out which table he's going to sit at, as we said earlier in this unit, there's factors that can change their mind over time, whether it's just their life cycle stage, whether it's historic events that are happening, socialization, maybe Madison joined the military, and that might influence their things as well. So with that, we've got the end of the unit. We'll go into detail into more of these situations, more of these ideas. We'll do some practice with it, but of course, let me know if you have questions.